We've all heard the cliched tale of the Titanic's doom. The iceberg, the sinking ship, the tragic loss of life. There's so much more to this nautical disaster than meets the eye. Join us on this voyage of discovery. From the heroic deeds of the engineers to the icy origins of the infamous iceberg. Get ready for this voyage as we uncover 20 bone-chilling Titanic facts no one knew. Number 20. None of the engineers survived. Picture this. It's the year 1912, and the Titanic is sinking faster than the hopes of Rose getting away with Jack. But did you know that none of the engineers survived? Now, it isn't because they couldn't get onto those few boats available. No, it's because they chose to stay loyal to their jobs. While the passengers were busy grabbing their jewels and furs, these men were down in the engine room, keeping the ship afloat for as long as they could. Joseph Bell and his team of 24 engineers, 6 electrical engineers, 2 boilermakers, a plumber, and his clerk are the unsung heroes of the Titanic. They knew that without power, the Titanic would be as useful as a screen door on a submarine. In fact, when the Titanic split into two, the engineers did not fail to perform their duty, and the power stayed on until the very last moment. These brave souls sacrificed their own lives to give others a fighting chance. They may not have gotten the recognition they deserved, but they'll forever be remembered as the ones who kept the power running and gave us the luxury of being able to send out distress signals before we hit the bottom of the ocean. Number 19. The origin of iceberg is unreal. The iceberg that sent the Titanic to the bottom of the ocean wasn't just any ordinary chunk of ice. No. It was the product of some seriously steamy weather that happened 4 years before the doomed voyage. A group of scientists at the University of Sheffield determined that the Titanic's iceberg nemesis was caused by a period of warm, wet weather that had weakened glaciers and made them more likely to calve. The iceberg that finally did the deed was a whopper of 400 feet in length, weighing in at a massive 2 megatons. That's about as heavy as a herd of 40 elephants, or a small moon. The Titanic didn't stand a chance against this colossal iceberg that had been brewing for years. The iceberg buckled over 100 meters of the ship's hull like it was made of paper, and the rest is history. Who knew Mother Nature had such a twisted sense of humor? Number 18, there was an imposter funnel. Atop the Titanic's mighty frame sat 4 towering smokestacks, or as we like to call them, funnels. Now you might assume that all 4 of these bad boys were working their chimney magic, billowing smoke into the sky. But hold on to your life jackets, because reality had a different plan. In a stroke of pure audacity, the crafty folks at the White Star Line decided that only 3 of those funnels would do any actual smoke-spewing work. Why, you ask? Well, back in the early 1900s, those funnels were the embodiment of speed and safety. And the White Star Line, in its infinite wisdom, wanted the Titanic to look like a boss, at least from the outside. So they cunningly added a 4th funnel, a complete imposter, nothing more than a fancy facade. What lurked inside this faux funnel, you wonder? Oh, just a luxurious first-class smoking room, fit for the finest cigar-puffing passengers. It was all smoke and mirrors, quite literally. But the deceit didn't stop there. The Titanic's siblings, the Olympic and the Britannic, followed suit with their own faux funnels. Because apparently these mischievous ships believed that adding a non-functional, purely ornamental 4th funnel would dazzle the sophisticated shipgoers. Who needs functionality when you can have aesthetic appeal, right? Number 17. There were not enough lifeboats. Over 2,200 souls set sail, blissfully unaware of the chilling fate lurking beneath the icy depths. But here's the kicker. The cursed ship only had a measly 20 lifeboats instead of 64 boats they originally needed. Can you believe it? That's like bringing a teaspoon to a flood. You see, the Titanic's owners had some peculiar priorities. They decided that having a boatload of lifeboats would clutter the deck and spoil the swanky views of their precious first-class passengers. And to make matters worse, safety regulations from the Stone Age were still in place, designed for ships half the Titanic's weight. They thought even a damaged ship could keep afloat for hours, giving enough time for those paltry lifeboats to make countless trips to rescue everyone. But guess what? Reality slapped them in the face.
She sinks in 20 minutes.
And get this, mate. A document emerged years later, revealing a safety inspector's desperate pleas for 10 more lifeboats. But the greedy owners, obsessed with leaving on time, shut him up faster than a clam.
The ship may sink.
If only they had listened, nearly 700 more people might have cheated death. The Titanic became a chilling reminder of human arrogance, a cautionary tale etched in history's depths. Number 16. Many victims remain unknown. The Titanic's sinking was a tragedy of epic proportions, with more than 1,500 people losing their lives. But the real tragedy is that we still don't know exactly how many people died. The official figures say 1,514, but the truth is much more complicated, with some sources saying it could be 1,419, or even as high as 1,635. Now let's talk about the recovery of the bodies. Recovering bodies from the sea is never a pleasant task, and the people who did it for Titanic can attest to that. They had to recover between 316 and 337 bodies, so take your pick. And get this, only 23% of the dead were recovered. The rest? Well, they're still down there somewhere. But wait, it gets darker. To this day, there are still bodies that remain unidentified. In fact, 42 of the bodies buried in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, remain unidentified. How can you identify someone when they were traveling under a false name, or when the lists of survivors were made amidst the chaos of the disaster? In 2008, for example, they finally identified the body of a 19-month-old baby, Sydney Leslie Goodwin. It only took 96 years, but hey, better late than never, right? Number 15. Optical illusion that sunk the ship. What if we told you that the Titanic's demise wasn't just due to bad luck and poor navigation? The actual villain was an optical illusion. Yes, you heard that correctly. According to new research by historian Tim Moulton, atmospheric conditions that night were just right for super-refraction, a fancy term for the bending of light that causes mirages. Yep, you heard that right. The Titanic was done in by a mirage. Apparently this phenomenon was recorded by several ships in the area, but no one realized the danger it posed. The Titanic's lookouts couldn't see the iceberg in time, and the nearby freighter, the Californian, didn't even know the Titanic was there. Why, you ask? Because the air was all wonky, with layers of cold air below layers of warmer air, creating a false horizon that made everything look closer than it really was. The Titanic fired off distress rockets, but they looked much lower than they actually were, thanks to the mirage. And when the Californians saw the rockets, they figured it was just some ship sailing away and didn't even bother to come to the Titanic's rescue. The more we hear it, the more we believe that this ship was cursed inside out. Number 14. Evacuation drill was canceled. Did you know that lifeboat drills were a common practice among ocean liners in the early 1900s? Yup, even the crew of the Titanic were expected to undertake these drills on a weekly basis. But you know what's crazy? On the day the Titanic hit an iceberg, the lifeboat drill was canceled. And who made the call to cancel it? None other than Captain Edward John Smith himself. It's still a mystery as to why he decided to scrap the drill, but some say it's because he wanted to hold one last Sunday service before retirement. How noble of him. But hold on. There were reports of ice in the area, and other ships had even passed on warnings. So, why on earth would the captain cancel the one thing that could prepare the crew and passengers for an emergency situation? It's like skipping the safety demonstration on a plane because, let's be real, when do you ever need to use it? Well, unfortunately for the Titanic crew and passengers, their luck ran out that night. The Titanic struck an iceberg on April 14th, and it sank, taking the lives of over 1,500 people. Maybe if the lifeboat drill had taken place, some of those lives could have been saved. Number 13. Musicians played till the end. You see, according to popular belief, the courageous band aboard the ill-fated ship played on until the bitter end, providing a small glimmer of musical comfort to the terrified passengers. James Cameron's iconic film, Titanic, depicted this heartbreaking scene, featuring the hymn, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." A Night to Remember, the 1958 film, also portrayed a similar moment. But in reality, the band consisted of 8 musicians, not a quaint string quartet like the movies would have you believe. Led by Wallace Henry Hartley, they entertained the esteemed passengers in the first-class saloon and the ship's restaurant. Now, as for the music they played during the ship's final moments, the accounts differ. Contrary to popular belief, survivor Harold Bride, the wireless operator, testified that the last tune he heard was Autumn. But let's not get too carried away with the tunes. The band, it seems, had the foresight to pack away their instruments before succumbing to the icy depths. Only 3 out of the 8 musicians' bodies were recovered. And in a dark twist, Wallace Hartley himself was found nearly 2 weeks later, clutching his case with his beloved violin inside. One could argue that his treasured instrument played a role in keeping his lifeless body afloat. How ironic, isn't it? Number 12. SS California watched Titanic sink. Imagine the day. It's April 15, 1912, and the SS Californian is cruising through the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The crew is minding their own business when suddenly they spot the Titanic's lights on the horizon. The Californian crew spots the distress rockets and reports it to Captain Lord, who is sound asleep in his cozy bed. Lord suggests they use Morse code to contact the Titanic instead of waking up the wireless operator. And when the officers on the Californian saw more rockets, did Captain Lord finally do something? Again, nope. He just brushed it off, thinking they were just some company signals. But the real kicker is when the Carpathia arrived to rescue the survivors, and the Californian finally got off its lazy butt to go check out the scene. What did they find? Wreckage. And that's it. And the icing on the cake? Captain Lord's conflicting and incomplete testimony. He couldn't even get his story straight about whether he saw the rockets or not. Lord claimed his ship was 30 miles from the Titanic, but other crew claimed it was less than 20. And what happened to the ship's logs? Oh, they just conveniently disappeared. In the end, both inquiries found Captain Lord and the Californian crew at fault. If only they had listened to the distress signals, they could have saved more lives. Maybe even all of them. But hey, who needs to be a hero when you can just go back to bed, right? Number 11. It was a tragedy that could have been avoided. Among the wreckage, deep beneath the ocean's surface, a haunting discovery was made. A single item that could have changed everything. Binoculars. In the years following this infamous disaster, a haunting question haunted the minds of many. Could those binoculars have averted the tragedy? If only a crew member in the crow's nest had laid eyes upon the iceberg in time, perhaps the ship could have steered clear, sparing countless lives. Now here's where the plot thickens. You see, those very binoculars were indeed on board the Titanic, but no one knew of their existence. Why, you ask? Well, it seems a certain sailor by the name of David Blair, who was meant to be on the voyage but was reassigned, forgot to leave behind the key to that locker. One survivor, Fred Fleet, boldly claimed that if those binoculars had been available, they would have spotted that iceberg in the nick of time. He swore they could have maneuvered the ship out of harm's way, but some skeptics argue that it was just too darn dark out there. No moon to light their path, and the sea was eerily calm, without a ripple to give away the lurking danger of icebergs. Number 10. On board was Miss Unsinkable. Now let us tell you the incredible story of Violet Jessup, also known as Miss Unsinkable, a woman who defied death not once, not twice, but 3 times. It will make you forget that Jack could have fit on that door. Her incredible survival story starts with her job as a stewardess for the White Star Line, a prestigious shipping company in the early 1900s. In 1911, the RMS Olympic, the ship she was working on, collided with the HMS Hawk, causing severe damage to the ship. But Jessup and the other crew members managed to get the ship back to port for repairs, saving everyone on board. But that was just the beginning of her remarkable story. The following year, Jessup was on board the RMS Titanic, which famously sank on its maiden voyage. As the ship was sinking, Jessup was ordered to board a lifeboat where she was given a baby to look after. Imagine that! You're on a sinking ship, and you're handed a baby to take care of, and you're expected to keep it safe while trying to save your own life. But Jessup did it with flying colors. However, Jessup's adventures didn't end there. In 1916, she was on board the HMHS Britannic when it hit a mine and began to sink. Jessup managed to escape the sinking ship but sustained a fractured skull in the process. Despite all of her experiences, Violet Jessup continued to work on ships, and she even served as a nurse during World War I. Number 9. The ship had more than one fatal flaw. Let's address the elephant in the room. Why did the Titanic sink after all? Back in the day, the Grand Titanic was a floating marvel praised for its state-of-the-art design. With double bottoms and 15 watertight bulkheads, they thought they had it all figured out. Shipbuilder magazine even declared it practically unsinkable. Those watertight compartments they boasted about? Turns out, the walls separating them were shorter than a hobbit. Water had a field day, freely flowing from one compartment to another like it owned the place. Oh, but wait, there's more absurdity to come. Can you believe that these supposedly watertight bulkheads weren't watertight at all? Yep, they forgot to seal the tops, leaving them as useful as a chocolate teapot. And now, let's talk about the crew, shall we? They received warning after warning about an iceberg lurking in the darkness. But what did they do? The radio operator, good old Jack Phillips, was busy playing catch-up with passenger messages. Who needs to pay attention to iceberg warnings when you can play pigeon, right? But it wasn't entirely Phillips' fault. Our favorite, SS California, sent a message, declaring that it's stuck in a maze of ice. But the message from Californian lacked a crucial code that would have caught Captain Smith's eye, demanding immediate attention. When the electric signal from Californian blared through the airwaves, nearly deafening Phillips, what did our quick-witted operator do? He couldn't resist shouting back, shut up, I am busy." The radio operator on the Californian, bless their heart, decided to call it a night. The iceberg arrived fashionably late at 11:40 p.m., just an hour after Phillips also decided to shut down the radio. Number 8. There are still human remains in the debris. In 2004, a photo emerged revealing more than just your ordinary sand and debris. Brace yourselves, for what appeared to be a boot and a leather coat hinted at something far more sinister. Human remains trapped inside the heart of the ill-fated ship. Renowned movie maker James Cameron, who has ventured to the Titanic wreck an astounding 33 times, claims he has witnessed 0 human remains. But let's not jump to conclusions, shall we? With a catastrophic event claiming the lives of around 1,500 souls, it's a bold statement to assume that no one rests within the unexplored chambers of the Titanic. Federal officials have long been at odds over the ship's fate. They argue that protecting the wreck from artifact hunters and looters is very important, as countless undiscovered corpses may still be present and undiscovered within its eerie corridors. The battle for preservation began decades ago when the Titanic was discovered in 1985, resting 2 miles beneath the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. In 1986, the RMS Titanic Memorial Act was enacted, aiming to safeguard the shipwreck. However, its effectiveness is still not very certain. The question lingers: where are the missing souls? Of the approximate 1,500 lives lost in the Titanic's tragic sinking, only a fraction, around 340 bodies, were ever recovered. Number 7. World's richest man was on board. John Jacob Astor was more than just the wealthiest passenger aboard Titanic. He was a man of many talents and interests, with a mind for innovation and a passion for the finer things in life. He spent several years traveling abroad before returning to the United States to manage the family fortune, which was worth an astounding $150 million at the time of his death. He wrote a semi-scientific novel, A Journey in Other Worlds, and he also invented several mechanical devices, including a bicycle brake and a pneumatic road improver. Astor was also a savvy businessman, and he built the Astoria Hotel in New York City in 1897. The hotel was adjacent to the Waldorf Hotel, which had been built by his cousin, William Waldorf Astor, and together they formed the Waldorf Astoria, one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. But Astor's personal life was not without its scandals. He divorced his first wife, Ava Shippen, in 1909, and married 18-year-old Madeline Force in 1911. They embarked on a trip to Egypt and Paris before deciding to return to America as first-class passengers aboard the Titanic. Tragically, John Jacob Astor did not survive the sinking of the Titanic. His body was recovered from the sea on April 22, 1912, and he was buried in Trinity Cemetery in New York. Number 6. People died before the voyage. We all know about the tragic loss of life on the ship itself. But did you know that even before it set sail, the Titanic claimed the lives of 8 workers and had a whopping 28 severe accidents during its construction? And if you thought that number was high, get this. They were actually expecting even more deaths given the time period. The Titanic cost a hefty £1.5 million to build, and generally, they allowed for 1 death for every £100,000 spent. So, they were anticipating around 15 deaths. How messed up is that? Most of the 8 people who died during construction fell from the ship or its staging, but the story of James Dobbin is especially chilling. He was a shipwright who was crushed to death on the day the Titanic was launched, in front of 10,000 people no less. Just as the ship was sliding into the river lagoon, poor James was losing his life. Out of all the men who died during construction, only 5 of their names are actually known: Samuel Scott, William Clark, John Kelly, Robert Murphy, and of course, James Dobbin. In 2012, a plaque was unveiled in Belfast memorializing all 8 of the workers who lost their lives building the ship. It's time for today's subscriber pick. One of our subscribers shared this image with us that has left him and his friends perplexed. They were checking out different images of the wreckage of Titanic until they came across this puzzling image that was overlooked by everyone. It looks like a man under the sea, but a very much alive man, exploring the sunken ship. What they discovered in the Titanic shocked the whole world. Can you help us solve this mystery? Who is this man? Is it the ghost of the ones who did not survive? Remember to comment down below and let us know your thoughts. Now, on to the next topic, number 5. Number 5. Japanese man condemned for surviving. Once upon a time, there was a civil servant named Hosono. He was sent on a research mission to Russia by the Japanese Ministry of Transport. On his way back, he boarded the infamous Titanic as a second-class passenger. During that fateful night, he was awakened by a steward and tried to reach the deck, but the crew member assumed he was a third-class passenger and stopped him. As he watched Lifeboat 10 being loaded, an officer shouted, "Room for 2 more!" and a man jumped aboard. Hosono saw this and decided to follow suit. Little did he know that this would be the beginning of his downfall. At first, Hosono's story didn't attract much attention. He went to his friends at Mitsui in New York to ask for help in getting home. But when a local newspaper dubbed him the lucky Japanese boy, the media frenzy began. And the seaman in charge of the boat, Edward Bewley, told a U.S. Senate inquiry that Hosono and the other man must have disguised themselves as women to sneak aboard. The Japanese press labeled him a coward, and he was ostracized and condemned by society. He lost his job and was even criticized in school textbooks as an example of dishonor. But he was too valuable to lose, so he was re-employed by the ministry and continued to work until 1939. Number 4. Supermoon sunk the ship. Can you believe it? The moon might have been the culprit behind the sinking of the Titanic. Scientists are now claiming that a supermoon caused a massive iceberg to drift into the Titanic's path, leading to the tragic end of the unsinkable ship. Apparently, this supermoon caused an unusually high tide that pulled the iceberg away from Greenland and into the shipping lanes traveled by the Titanic. According to forensic astronomers at Texas State University, this kind of iceberg would normally have melted before it could reach the Titanic's path. But the supermoon tide was so strong that it prevented it from melting. It's believed that this alignment between the moon and Earth occurred on January 4, 1912, and the Titanic sank just a few months later on April 15th of the same year. What's even more shocking is that this theory could explain why the experienced Titanic captain Edward Smith seemed to ignore warnings of icebergs in the area. It's likely he never expected an iceberg of such enormous size to drift so far south, all thanks to the moon. Number 3. The wreckage might vanish. Titanic faces a fate more dramatic than its ill-fated sinking. Back in 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard stumbled upon the rusting hulk of the Titanic, hidden deep beneath the Atlantic's surface. The ship seemed frozen in time, preserved by the harsh conditions at over 3.5 kilometers below. Between the treacherous deep-sea currents, pesky metal-eating bacteria, and good old-fashioned salt corrosion, the Titanic is deteriorating faster than a melting ice cube in the Sahara. By 2030, we'll be left with nothing more than a big pile of rust to gawk at. Blame it on the Halomonas Titanicae, the microscopic culprits responsible for feasting on iron and sulfur. They've turned the ship into a grotesque masterpiece of stalactite-like formations that resemble rusty icicles. The ship is already collapsing upon itself, like Captain Edward Smith's quarters. Remember that bathtub you used to see? Faded into oblivion. Number 2. Casualties included dogs as well. The Titanic was a tragic event in history, and among the casualties were also some furry friends. 9 dogs were aboard the ship, with most of them kept in the kennel. As the ship began to sink, someone freed them, causing chaos as the dogs ran around the deck. Sadly, most of them didn't survive, including a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, an Airedale Terrier, a Chow Chow, and a champion French bulldog named Gamin de Pycombe. There were also heart-wrenching stories of the passengers who couldn't bear to leave their beloved pets behind. One such passenger was Anne Elizabeth Isham, who refused to leave the Titanic without her Great Dane. Miss Isham didn't survive the disaster, and there are rumors that her body was later found with her arms wrapped around her dog. On a slightly less depressing note, 3 dogs did survive the Titanic: Lady, a Pomeranian, Sun Yat-sen, a Pekingese, and another Pomeranian belonging to Martin and Elizabeth Jane Rothschild. Number 1. Titanic had bathing issues. If you're someone who values good hygiene, count yourself lucky that you weren't aboard the Titanic. And no, not just because it sank, but because it must have smelled like a bunch of rotten fish wrapped in a used sock. The first-class passengers were a bit better off with their own private bathrooms, but down in third class, things got a bit rough. Imagine 700 people sharing just 2 bathrooms with only 2 tubs. And get this, one of the tubs was reserved for the 200 women, while more than 450 men had to share the other one. And even if you had the luxury of a private tub, it wasn't like you were using it every day. Nope. First-class passengers would go a whole week between baths, as was the norm back then. So they spent the entire journey stewing in their own sweat and filth. It was a dark and smelly journey indeed. Titanic will keep on breaking our hearts every time we hear more about it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.